decided to go on a walk around this track, but I had one of those aha moments. My friends have all pretty much vanished, and people ask, what happened? What exactly changed? Welcome to Retired Life with Reese Will. I appreciate all of you. You know, while it seems like I'm alone a lot of times, but I'm not actually lonely. Things just have shifted, but I built this internal peace and independence. You know, in the past, I probably would have called this feeling lonely. Now, I see it as more of a place of serenity, quiet, and pure relaxation. Sitting through, forced meetings or trying to keep up with those weird, awkward conversations that feel like a third elbow, it just doesn't work for me anymore. Look, great friends are amazing to have around, but you'll find that there are fewer and fewer of them as we age. Lately, I really started to figure out why this happens. One of the main reasons I've realized is that we're usually evolving at a different pace, a different speed. A lot of our old friends, especially in a situation like mine, when you're in your 50s and 60s and people are retiring at completely different stages, people are changing. Think about the nonsense you used to put up with at work, those microaggressions, subtitles, workplace politics, the bosses constantly leaning on you, or people giving you the cold shoulder and guilt trips, all that throughout our thoughts. But now we've just grown and accustomed to not dealing with it anymore. As we as we age, we start to value the peace and that comes from not being controlled by the outside noise. And we realize that, we're just changing at a different speed. I think I'm gonna take this inside. It's kind of windy out here. And, we realize we're just changing at a different speed than the people around us. At a lot of those cohort or those co-workers we used to consider friends might be stuck in that daily grind. When you're in your 50s, like me at 57, going on 58, some of us are stepping away into retirement while others are still working. Our priorities changed so fast. Personally, I didn't get my life satisfaction from my job anyway. We all know that deep down that most people we work with, aren't truly our friends. Everyone is just there to trade hours for a paycheck. They show up, put in their 8 hours, 8 to 12 hours, and get paid just like you and me. Sure, there are certain camaraderies when you're in the building, when you're in the office or a part of the club or a bigger scene. That common ground keeps everyone together for a while. But once you retire and start aging, those bosses who used to stress you out, those coworkers who created that chaos environment, they lose their grip. We used to just adapt and adjust to their drama. Now we see right through it. The empty promises from a manager or boss telling you to do X, Y, and Z. You'll get a day off at an 8-hour request, or a coworker throwing little guilt trips your way. None of it impacts us the same way anymore. We moved on. Once you're retired, you look back and think, wow, we really don't have that much in common. Years ago, you thought you shared, everything with them, but time shows how much everything has changed. While we're growing up and moving forward, a lot of them are still stuck in yesteryear, chasing the corporate ladder, living for that standard 2-week vacation and repeating the same old routine. That's how people naturally get left behind. And it's why those old friends, they fade away. There's another major reason for this. I usually have a special, unique, strong gut feeling. You instantly pick up on how someone is feeling, or you see it right away when something is off. I used to be around people back in the day who weren't aware at all. They couldn't read between the lines even if you spelled it out to them in black and white. But when you became hyper aware later in life, you started reading the room effortlessly. The hidden messages and the tiny clues you used to completely miss. Being tuned in to people's comments and vibrations means you instantly catch that unspoken vibe that says, you know what? You're not really one of us. Like when a group of coworkers heads out to lunch and intentionally grabs someone else instead of you. At that time, you might tell yourself, it's nothing, just lunch. But when you look closer, there's a clear message there. If someone truly wants you around, they'll invite you. And honestly, having this special, unique gut feeling gives you kind of a strength. It's like you develop that sixth sense where nothing slicks gets past you. It's like you've seen this movie before. So nobody can play you. Suddenly you see right through all that stuff, man. You see right through all them hidden agendas and become way more sensitive to what people are actually dealing with. That intuition gives you an unfair advantage. Once you can read people and understand what they actually mean without them ever saying it out loud, you look back and think, wow, how did I miss this all these years for all that long? Again, it's not overthinking or overreacting or being too dramatic. It's just recognizing that a lot of these people wasn't really your friends in the first place. As we get into our 50s and 60s, and me hitting 57, I really started noticing this a few years ago. I began to see through people and realize they didn't always have my best interests at heart. Now, we all know the old saying, look out for number one, take care of yourself. It's just like a safety speech in the airplane. If the oxygen mask dropped during some type of turbulence or something was to happen, they always tell you to secure your own mask first before helping somebody else, like your partner or your child, because if you don't take care of yourself, you're no good to anybody else. And that's probably the best analogy for it. Too often people will try to take advantage of you. They'll cross the line, make inappropriate comment about you or say something slick about somebody you love. Back in the day, you probably just shrug it off. And it reminds me years ago when my father and I used to sit down on the porch and we would barbecue, religiously back on Saturdays and Sundays. In his later years, he had these guys he considered his friends. But even back then, I could read them like a book, man. I could tell. And I knew they wasn't really his friends. It wasn't really guys that he should call his friends. But my father would talk about these guys from the neighborhood from back in the day. But once my dad passed, when he passed away, years later, this guy showed up trying to talk to my mom, trying to be slick. I remember thinking right then, that's not okay. But at that time, I didn't really want to make no waves, so I just let it slide. And you get caught in that awkward position where you don't know if it's your place to speak up and say something. You know it's wrong what he's doing. You know it's wrong, but you're just hoping mom will realize and call him out on it. My mom is and will always be a beautiful lady, but sadly, I saw this happen way too much. In my life, loyalty is not a quality that is really hard to find. I know my dad is gone and my mom needs that companionship, but not from his friends. In my eyes, I'm very protective of my mom. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but I feel how I feel. I can't help it. I learned a massive lesson from those experiences, and I learned that once a person crosses the line or a boundary on you, you shouldn't let it go. I've changed. Once you get older and you don't bite your tongue like you used to, another shift happens, and as we get older. And I've really noticed this over the past 7 to 8 years. I never used to look at things this way. I wasn't always this deep of a thinker, spending real time alone, not just being by myself, but actually sitting with your thoughts, no noise, no distractions. At first, it was uncomfortable. Then you start noticing things about yourself, your reactions, your habits, your blind spots, where your self-awareness grows. I never really was too emotional. I never had that type of trait to be emotional. I never let feelings get the best of me. Probably got that from my dad's side of the family. They were incredibly stern, tough, and a little rough around the edges. He had 5 or 6 siblings, and they were raised hard, rough. They didn't really live with their emotions or with their emotions on their sleeves, and that's pretty much how I developed. I didn't react to things. I wasn't raised to be overly emotional, but of that, I never used to overthink things either. Overthinking is, to me, a trap. I just, I really didn't. To me, overthinking is like it nags at you in the background and creates all this internal debate and conflict between your head and your heart. It never felt productive to me. I was always pretty much stoic. That's just the way I was. Even as a young kid, I was vibrant and happy, but after experiencing the real world, the ups and some downs, and some toxic work environments, I changed it to a much more guarded person. But over the last few years, even though I was never an emotional thinker, I became more in tune with myself internally. Things started shifting after I lost my dad, losing friends and dealing with cancer. I felt like I was on the verge of disappearing. I started internalizing everything. I realized, I was thinking on a much deeper level than the people around me. My coworkers were spending all their energy worrying about the latest basketball and football game or the latest trade, like LeBron James going to LA or something like that. But as I aged, I started focusing on the bigger picture, the what ifs and the wins and the hows, seeing my dad, relatives and friends pass away made me face, my mortality. I realized that there's so much more to life than superficial sports talk or fantasy football. That's actually why I started going on long walks. I needed to get away and clear my head. I needed to vent and just process everything while putting in some miles, trying to exercise a little bit. And that's a great exercise. More importantly, it gives me the space to think about where I've been, where I am today, and where I'm heading. Years ago, I wouldn't have cared about now at 57. I've hit a completely different level of internal reflection, and I recognize that a lot of people just aren't on that same wavelength. They stay on the surface while I'm looking deeper. Something else you realize in your mid-50s, and a lot of you have probably noticed this too, that the outside validation completely stops. You start realizing that out there in the world, nobody really cares. Everyone is just rushing around, completely consumed by their own lives. If you have a big success, a win, or something, or finally have a good breakthrough after a long string of bad luck, don't expect people to notice, but people won't take 2 seconds out of their day to day to give you an attaboy or, tell you they love your book that you just wrote or something like that. Like the older you get, the fewer accolades you receive, and even fewer people are willing to celebrate you as you get older. Nobody is validating your life accolades anymore. There are no big birthday parties, or no one cares about your wins, and no one really cares about your losses either. So how do you handle that? How do you validate yourself internally so you know you're on the right track? Deep down, humans naturally crave approval. But as we age, we have to move past that. I don't need a party with balloons and whistles anymore. Most of us don't. We also realize our bosses at work are never going to validate our good behavior. They only look at the highlight, the negatives, and the mistakes. That was my life for years. My manager never had anything constructive to say unless he was digging up some reason to give me a lower rating on my performance review. They love hiding behind terms like constructive criticism, skip level meetings, or performance improving plans. But that's not what really matters. We're talking about a real deep level of validation that the world simply stops giving you. Because of that, we have to find it within ourselves. We have to be okay whether we're being mediocre, exceptional, or completely missing the mark sometimes. Nobody else is going to do it for us. I have to look into the mirror and say, you did a great job today. You did a great job on that. Or, hey, that was close. Learn from it. Move on. And do better next time. I didn't start practicing internal validation until a few years ago. But the older you get, the more crucial it becomes. You have to go internal to find your worth. As always, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Make sure you check out these videos popping up on the screen. I know you're going to love them. Appreciate y'all, man. And make sure y'all comment and let me know what you think about this video. Y'all take care, and we'll see you in the next one.